Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Provitt. I am one of our team within our modern management of the older adult division. In our geriatrics division, we have 3 courses that make up our certification. We have our 2-day live course. We have our 8-week online essential foundations and our 8-week online advanced concepts. In these courses, you will learn everything that you need to know in order for you to feel super equipped to be working with your older adults and challenging them in the way that they deserve. If you are wanting to know when our next courses are, I encourage you to go to ptonice.com/resources and sign up for MMOA Digest. That is our bi-weekly email newsletter where we bring all of the research to your inbox, but also we talk about all of the courses that we have coming up over the next several months and in different regions in our online courses. All right, let's talk about intensity. Yesterday on Instagram, I posted a little bit of a rant. For anyone who kind of doesn't know, I am right now hopefully very close to finishing my PhD. It has been a long process, lots of edits. That's a whole other rant. But in order for me to prepare for my defense, we've been looking at kind of scouring the literature on resistance training and resistance training principles. My PhD dissertation is looking at high intensity resistance training with respect to load. And so really part of my job as I prepare for my defense is to look at high intensity resistance training in different areas in geriatrics and try and compare that to the paradigm that I was looking at in my research studies. As I was doing that, I recognized that in the research space, there is a lot of confusion around what intensity actually means. And when we talk to clinicians, we get into the same conversations about having a hard time objectively measuring intensity when it comes to our interventions. And we go really into a deep dive in our online courses through doing programming assignments in advanced concepts, going through the filter of different chronic diseases. And in our live course, we talk about exercise prescription a lot to feel that intensity. So in live course, we really feel it. In online, we really try and dive into what it means. And this is where we probably get the most questions in our curriculum about how to really do this. And it's understandable why intensity in the strength training space can be really difficult, because when we look at it in the aerobic space, it's easier to conceptualize what intensity feels like, right? As you start to sweat more, your face gets more red, your breath gets more labored, your conversation starts as a nice conversation and ends up with maybe being able to let out a couple of sentences every couple of breaths. We can see that intensity escalating. But we don't have that same cardiovascular response all the time when it comes to intensity in the strength training space. And so when we are thinking about intensity in the strength training space, the part where we really start to get confused is because we are manipulating sets, load, and repetitions. And by manipulating these variables on a sliding scale, and they're going to be interlinked, we are going to be able to apply intensity in different ways. And it is going to feel different when we are doing one type of intensity versus the other, and when we compare it to aerobic training. Here's what I mean. If we are thinking about high load intensity resistance training, which we advocate very strongly for in our MMOA division, it is not going to feel like you are out of breath or that you are having that big sweat response. It is going to feel like you are pushing as hard as you can, and you're getting to a point where your muscles are just not able to lift another repetition. It doesn't feel this. It feels like effort and load on the body that is creating a harder time pushing against that resistance. When we are looking at high load intensity resistance training, we are looking at repetitions less than 6, load higher, And our sets can be anywhere between 1 and 3 sets. So 1 to 3 sets times, usually in that 1 to 6 repetition, load is higher. That is high intensity. When we look at high repetition intensity resistance training, we are taking the load down because we are taking the repetitions up, and that intensity is going to feel more like a muscular burn, right? That is when we are getting close to muscular failure. These repetitions are going to be greater than 6, maybe approaching 15 to 20. We are going to have a cardiovascular response. Our heart rate is going to go up. If you've ever done, a set of 20 squats with the weight on your body, you know that your heart's pumping. And you have this feeling of intensity from a muscle like burn perspective. So your heart rate is going up, but you're also feeling this like lactic acid that is starting to build in your legs. And that is where, we're having a hard time clearing that, and we are approaching muscular failure. So unlike high load intensity resistance training, high repetition intensity resistance training, you are going to feel some of the similar characteristics that you are seeing in high intensity interval training within the cardiovascular or aerobic space. And that means that when we start talking about high intensity resistance training, that is where a lot of our research goes, right? We see a lot of our high intensity resistance training being 3 sets of 8 to 15 repetitions at 60% or less of a person's 1 repetition maximum. What we advocate for within MMOA is that we have to know how to dose high load intensity and high repetition intensity and recognize clinically when we would leverage one versus the other. If our client's goal is to be able to get up out of a chair without using their hands, their absolute amount of strength is less than the demands of that task, which is getting up from a chair, right? Because they have to leverage a compensatory mechanism, which is utilizing their upper extremity because their legs are not strong enough to get up from a chair. Here's scenario 1. When they are having that issue, it means that they need an absolute increase in strength. And how we are going to do that is by leveraging high load intensity resistance training. So we need to take the repetitions down, take the external load up, and push intensity that way. In scenario 2, if client 2, if we are having an individual who has no problem getting up from a chair, but is starting to have knee pain when they do lots of stairs or lots of walking, maybe their absolute amount of strength is there, but it's that endurance or that fatigue that is unmasking that pain. For those individuals, we would want to leverage high repetition intensity resistance training, sub threshold where pain starts to escalate in order for us to get towards that meaningful goal for them. So what that might look like is trying to find the threshold where they feel muscular burning or they're approaching muscular failure or pain starts to elevate above a level that we are comfortable with. And we are doing high repetition. So we may be doing 3 sets of 8 step-ups each side at a load that gets them to approaching muscular failure. In that scenario, we would be leveraging that high repetition intensity. In both of these scenarios, and what I really want to impress upon you all is that when it comes to the research in resistance training, intensity matters. And we need to be able to sliding scale that intensity. Another way we see this in clinical practice, and we talk about all the time, is that when it comes to high load intensity resistance training, most of the time we're going to want to be present. Ideally, this is supervised resistance training, especially for new learners, especially for individuals with complexities. So we may leverage high load intensity in the clinic, but we may not feel comfortable with them heavy loading by themselves at home because their irritability can kind of be borderline. And so maybe then their home exercise program, we're going to be leveraging more high repetition intensity. So there's different ways that we can be leveraging both. But the point is that we need to be able to differentiate those two, and we need to know how to assess objective intensity in both of those spaces. The problem that we're seeing in the research right now is that we have so heavily leveraged high repetition intensity that we only have a handful of studies that is leveraging high load in the geriatric space. We have plenty that is leveraging high load intensity in our middle-aged and younger individuals, our athletic populations, but we need to be leveraging this more in our older adult populations because it is unmasking this unconscious ageism that we believe that high intensity can only be done with high repetitions for our older adults. And if you've been with the MMOA crew, you know that we are constantly battling back against that narrative because our older adults need to be stronger. And if they need to be stronger, then we need to be honing in on the muscular physiology that we know is going to get them as strong as possible, which is going to be bringing those reps down, getting that load higher, tapping into those type 2 fibers, getting as many motor units recruited as possible, and making sure that we are hitting those intensity thresholds. When we are thinking about this, kind of coming full circle, the important part is that we distinguish between what we are trying to do. Are we trying? Yes, we are going to do high intensity, but are we trying to do high load intensity or high repetition intensity? If we are doing high load intensity, it's going to feel different. It is not going to feel like a muscular burn. We're probably not, we could have that cardiovascular response, but most of the time we're not going to have it. It's going to be blunted compared to other methods. And we are just getting to the point where the load is starting to act on the body in a way that is causing us to slow down our repetitions, use a high amount of effort, and feel like our capacity is kind of hitting this threshold that we won't be able to do anymore. When we switch to high repetition intensity, that switches, right? It's gonna mimic a little bit more like our aerobic training. Our heart rate is gonna go up. We will use this. Jeff talked about this last week around EMOMs and AMRAPs and rounds for time. That is us leveraging high repetition intensity. So we are going to be utilizing that as accessories for home exercise programs to increase efficiency in our exercise programs. There is many ways for us to leverage high repetition intensity. The important part is that we distinguish between the two, and then we push on research to be looking at both. There are times where I am looking at an individual's method sections and they say that they are doing 3 sets of 12 to 15 at 80% of their 1 rep max. It's not a true 80% if you're hitting that repetition count because it's just not possible. 80% is around a 5 to 6 rep max if we look at our physiology tables. So really trying to think about this question of intensity, because intensity matters, intensity wins. The research is too strong to not be leveraging high intensity, but we have to know what the differences and nuances are when we are going to leverage those different types of high intensity, and then how do we objectively measure that we are hitting that mark. All right, I hope that rant made sense. This has been something that has been noodling in my mind for a long time as I prep for my PhD defense, and something that we see all the time, especially when we're on the road or talking through the weeks around exercise prescription in our online courses. If you are wanting to figure out where we are, I encourage you to sign up to MMOA Digest. It's a bi-weekly email. It comes into your email that talks about all the new research coming up in the area, but also talks about all of the courses coming up over the next 6 months. And so we break it down by region so you can figure out if we're nearby. If you have any questions about the intensity piece for strength training, please let me know. And then hopefully we can keep this conversation going. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And we will talk soon.